to Position of Neutrality. Welcome to New Freedom. How many of you are first-time visitors here today? Oh, very good. Welcome. How many of you are members here today? Oh, good. A good percentage of you. Thank you. Appreciate it. How many of you are graduates here today? Wow. Thanks for coming back and helping show people the way. How many of you are 360s? Members, graduates, and come back here and helping work now? That's awesome. That's it, guys. That's a fellowship growing up about you. A couple of things before we get started. If you're new members here, your families are welcome to this group. You can come in at 6:15, spend time with you before the meeting. Doesn't matter how long you've been here. We like for your families to see you in a new light when you get out. And also, Chaplain Lee does the Recovery Church service every Saturday. And Chap knows how to talk to all of us well. He's been spending time with people that have had difficult starts for the last 30 years of his life, and we're blessed to have him here every Saturday encouraging us and calling our attention to the power to live within us. So Wayne and Brian do a Wednesday meeting. If you guys are wanting to come in and work with men and women in recovery, sponsor, mentor, whatever you call that, you'll come through Wayne and Brian's group on Wednesday. All of those meetings start at 7 o'clock. So I think that's everything else. For those of you who are here for the first time, let me warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. The primary reason that's liable to happen is we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here is we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. Fair enough? And so all this is a book of their testimony of how, regardless of their belief, they were restored to a better way of life, a standard of living better than the best they'd ever known. And so what I try and do here every Thursday is show you how I find my experience in theirs. It may seem like I'm trying to tell you what the book says, but I'm trying very hard not to do that, because it's none of my business what the book says to you, because it's a book of experience. But I'm trying to do is show you how I find my experience in it and encourage you to have yours. Does that make sense? So with that said, we're in steps 5, 6, and 7 tonight. And step 5 is probably one of those steps that people look at and are frightened of. And steps 6 and 7 are probably the least understood steps in our manner of living. So we're going to try and unpack some of that for you tonight, if we can. You want to go in your book to chapter 6, a little chapter called Into Action. Yes, to Sean's point, did you notice they went from how it works into action? And they didn't bother to put in a chapter on into thinking. And you know why, don't you? How many of you, coming back from addictive disorder, tried to think your way into better acting? What we learn is we do not think our way into better acting. We act our way into better thinking. Does that make sense? Okay. So, into action. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? When they put a question mark, they want me to go inward. How many of you made a personal inventory and then knew what you were going to do about it? Did you have help or did you just know? Sean had a sponsor that told him what he was going to do about it. Any of the rest of you? You know, one of the things we do really weird in our modern fellowship is we tell everyone to get a sponsor and we don't give them any reason why. Because like a sponsor in professional athletics is somebody that puts stickers on my car or their name on my jersey. So we got this idea, get a sponsor, and it's like, so the reason, to Sean's point, we're about to embark on a journey we've never tried, and it would be useful to have a guide through the process, because there's no reason you should know how to do something you've never done. But we tend to have some fear around admitting that we don't know, even though there's no reason we should know. Does that make sense? Okay. So we've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. Is that what you've been trying to do, or did you know that's what we were trying to do in 12-step recovery? So not everyone understands that. We know we're trying to get a new attitude, but notice how they said that was sort of dependent on a new relationship with my Creator. And if I come here with some doubts, if I come here as an atheist or an agnostic, as half of the original fellowship did, then my obvious question is, why would I want a new relationship with a Creator I do not believe in? Any of you have been in that mindset? Okay, so the reason that is these people are witnessing to an experience they had. So even though half of them were atheists or agnostics in the beginning, either God did not exist or God could not be proven to exist, now they're witnessing every one of us has gained access to and believes in a power greater than ourselves, with whom we can form a simple relationship, and they go on and on to describe that. So by this time, they know that if I'm having a difficult time in creation, I need to check in with Creator, because the world doesn't cause how I think and feel. The world reflects how I'm thinking and feeling. Does that make sense? And it doesn't have to make sense if you haven't had the experience, but that's why they say so declaratively what they're saying, and you can't be expected to know it till you've had the experience. Does it make sense? Okay. And then it says, and to discover the obstacles in our path. How many of you thought you knew the obstacles in your path? How many of you were wrong? Okay, good. That's good. And the reason we say that is we often think the obstacles in our path are our incarceration history, our relationship, whatever, all our difficulties are our circumstances. That's not our path. The difficulties in my path are my hopelessness, my guilt, my shame, my remorse that steals the joy out of every moment of my life. And oftentimes those difficult circumstances are placed before me by Creator in order to strip me of those obstacles. Does that make sense? All right, so we've admitted certain defects and we've ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. What is the trouble in a rough way? Selfishness, self-centeredness. That, we think, is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. Remember that from step 3? Okay. We've put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. When did we do that? Yeah, since we had that reading in 3, we've now had our own experience. We've taken a look at those calamities, pomps, and worships. We got armed with the facts about ourselves, and now we've kind of got our finger on the part we played in some of the suffering we've endured. Yes? Now these are about to be cast out. Well, that's good news. This requires action on our part, which when completed will mean that we've admitted to God. When we say God, what are we talking about? Okay, you got to get queued up now, guys. Those of you who are veterans, when we say God, yes, because some people come here without a belief system, but we all can come to believe in power, right? Because it's a tangible demonstration. Okay, all right, so to ourselves and to another human being, the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. So they told us how it works, and now Into Action is going to start breaking it down for us, precisely how they recovered. Okay? This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing ourselves with another person. So how many of you, before you ever embarked on maybe even a 3rd step decision, looked at 5 and said, I'm not telling that to anybody? So you didn't get armed with the facts about yourself. You didn't give yourself the preparatory flow of the Spirit. So obviously you were afraid to grow into a better version of you because you weren't spiritually prepared. So my suggestion is stay in the step you're in. Don't look downfield. And we'll help you walk through it. Okay? We think we've done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. How many of you have concluded that? How many of you have been through your step process and are in the manner of living and still from time to time have concluded, I'll just keep that little shit to myself? How'd that work for you? Let's see what they said. There's doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. You ever think about why a solitary self-appraisal would be insufficient?
Because I'm self-deluded.
Because selfishness is the problem. I must be rid of self. So a self-appraisal is probably not a good idea, given that the main problem centers in the mind. Although it is one we employ with the regular gusto. Yes? Okay. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We'll be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. Wouldn't you? Yeah. Give me good reasons. The best reason first, if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. So you got to ask yourself at this point, you may not be a drinker, but whatever it is that chased you into the rooms of recovery, did you come here to overcome that addiction? Or are you here just resting? How many of you came just to rest and didn't know you were here just to rest? So it says, many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We'll be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they've turned to easier methods. So I want you to think about this. I'm trying to get armed with the facts about myself. The purpose of this manner of living for someone who's had a difficult start, such as me, part of the purpose is to receive the healing I need for the trauma I have endured, but also for the trauma I have continued to inflict because of what I endured. And so if I hold on to that one little thing about myself, that one little cut is the one that I'm going to bleed out through because I didn't go out and use it to help another and receive the healing I need, because I'm a vessel of healing, but I can't heal myself. I ain't the healer. Does that make sense? Okay, so I got to get to trying to avoid this humbling experience. They've turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. How many of you did everything you thought you were supposed to do, still struggled? So you went through the steps, some portion of it. Did anyone ever point out to you there is no rest of the program? Because another thing we message poorly in fellowship, we say, I've worked my steps. I used to work my dope dealer too, but I was never done. So the reality here is I have agreed in 3, as long as I have breath in my lungs, I've agreed to advocate for my brother or sister. That's my job. So there is no rest of the program. So we think the reason is they never completed their house cleaning. How many of you thought your house cleaning was completed when you did a 4 and 5? That's a common mistake. The house cleaning, all I did was identify it and share it. I haven't gone out and set it right, so I haven't received the healing I need through me to help the other. Make sense? You may not even have a profound 2nd step, 3rd step, 4th step, 5th step spiritual experience until you're taking somebody through as you're practicing your 12. And you may have to work with a few before that happens. All right, so they took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they'd lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. If you're not looking in the book, the authors put the word thought in italics. Why do you think they did that? It is important. And it was a big deal to have to change the typeset at the time. But they had to call our attention to it because of a common misconception. If we're into self-reliance, which we've discovered won't work, then I can think my way into better acting. It's the choices I make. But if that hasn't proved true for me, human beings cannot think or act their way into a state of being. All they can do is be in a state of being. And the minute you're aware that you're in that state of being, you're out. So it's got to be a power greater than you that, absent you, is doing this work. Doesn't that make sense to you now? Think about that. How many of you done something for somebody and, that was selfless of me? Perhaps you got a selfie of you being selfless. So there I was thinking I was absent, caught myself. Okay. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. All's in italics. Why? Well, the first thing we got to point out is a lot of people get hung up on the third step. I don't want to turn my will over. God doesn't want your will. He just wants it properly aligned. There's not my will and God's will. There's God's will. It has no opposite and my disagreement with it. So it'd be a really good idea to get on board with what is. Does that make sense? And then they tell me I need to learn of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary. I have to become less worldly and more spiritual. And I can't bring that about except by subordinating the ego and strengthening the spirit, which means confronting my fears and subordinating myself to servant status as I go along. Consciously, captive the thought. Because I'm going to think, fuck him, but I'm still going to say, how can I help you? What I'm trying to tell you is there's still a human here, but the spirit is powerful and will get more powerful if I will subordinate my will to what is. Does it make sense? And I know when I say that, I get everyone's attention. But anyway, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He's very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. So they're talking about the sensory battle within. How many of you wanted to think of yourself one way, presented yourself one way, but knew, at least in your mind, that was not really who you were? It is a struggle. It is a battle, isn't it? How many of you tried to pretend to be something in order to get along with a certain group of people, and you knew you weren't that guy, but the world believed you were the one you were pretending to be, and you ended up in a place like this? We meet you guys all the time, right? That whole idea, that persona that I didn't want you to believe me all the time, okay. All right, so that's a storm within. Remember, they told us that we needed philosophical comfort. We need a power that can philosophically comfort me. When I'm in this kind of a storm, that's a real thing. I will come to believe in God when I'm philosophically comforted, when I don't believe I belong, and yet I somehow belong. Does that make sense? All right, so the inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. So how many of you had sprees? Look at who I'm talking to. Like the whole room, right? Everyone's had sprees, even if you wouldn't have described it as a spree. Coming to his senses, he's revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. How many of you have vague remembrances? Hey, you didn't have to do too many drugs to have vague remembrances. How many of you are ragers? How many of you got super angry and then found out what you did reading the report. Happens. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they'll never see the light of day. So where did they tell us the power was found? Deep down inside. How many of you relate to pushing those memories far down inside yourself? It's not a very good plan when you think about, now I'm just obscuring consciousness, aren't I? He's under constant fear and tension. How did the doctor describe the alcoholics he treated? Restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience that sense of comfort, ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. Any of you relate to that? So me not disclosing, not bringing to light those things that are troubling me about me are going to doom me to an alcoholic death. Does it make sense? Even though admitting them is going to cause me to humble myself, to get honest with myself. Okay? Do you understand how the process is going to provide me a path to get to where they're telling me I got to get? Okay. So that says that makes for more drinking. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We spent thousands of dollars for examinations. How many of you have gone to get psychiatric help? Willingly or unwillingly? All of you who are members or were members, if you didn't have your hand up, I want to remind you that we are a behavioral health. So you came here. We spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we've given these doctors a fair break. So that's them. How many of you went to a shrink or a doctor along the way to get a little help? How many of you told them the whole truth? How many of you followed their advice? Not one single hand. We seldom told them the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Why do we call that to your attention? Because if you want to be an effective servant, don't give people advice. The answers for them are in them. Ask them questions, tell them what you did, don't give advice, because we as a class are people who have spent thousands of dollars for informed medical opinions, lied to get those opinions, and then ignored the results of those opinions. So if you want to be effective, point out to your men and women that the answers for you are in you. And I'm here armed with the questions to help you learn that truth, but I would cheat you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving you a demonstration of that power. And the power to know what's right is in you. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance for recovery. So how many of you discovered that medical people have a low opinion of addicts and their chance for recovery? And how did you discover it? Did they tell you you were exhibiting drug-seeking behavior? It's the kind of way they got the system set up, ain't it? You gotta do a little drug seeking. I tell you where the dope dealer is. You got to go in and get the little paper. No? None of you guys did that, huh? I feel so alone. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. So how many of you have spent a little time thinking about who you're going to ask to help you through the process? How many of you spent so long in it you just went and got high instead? So rightly and naturally, we think well, but don't use that as a mere excuse to postpone. This is about getting honest with yourself. You've encountered power by now. You've got through an inventory by now. You wouldn't be sitting in here if you're not at least interested in the process. And so what I'm saying is if you want to ask someone to help you, ask. They're either going to say, yes, I'd be honored to, or I'm too busy. If they're too busy, they're not the right one. It's just that simple. Okay? All right, so those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must and, of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. So if you have a religious belief such as confession, they're saying, by all means, go to confession, but don't assume that confession is going to achieve the same outcome as a fifth step sharing. Does that make sense? It may not. I've known many people in the clergy who also knew the process, and they were perfectly competent to take you through the process. But don't give up one for the other. They'll enrich one another as you grow. Okay? Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. How many of you did that because you had pending charges and you knew it was protected by the confessional? That's common. And how many of you have sponsored people that needed to go to a doctor or a clergy? I have too. And they're saving you too, because some of the things people have to disclose if you're in the healthcare business, you got to do your report. Now you're in a bad spot. Okay? So the thing is, we don't need to know the dark secrets about you. We need you to know the dark secrets about you and know that God already knows them. There are no secrets in the realm of the Spirit. Go dump your shit. Let's go. We got work to do. Okay, so we often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholic. So how many of you have encountered said people who do not understand alcoholic?
My ex-wife.
How many of you discovered them other than in Sean's house? Did you discover them in places that surprised you? Did you discover them in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? How many of you have had somebody you were working with or somebody you were close to that twisted off again and you got angry at them? How many of you twisted off yourself and got angry at you? So we really don't ever have to get any further than our nose. Close your eyes, touch your nose. That's what you need to inventory. Because none of us understand alcoholics. We are incomprehensible beings. And understanding is God's realm. I need to grow in understanding through this process, because the understanding we gain in this process is not of human origin. You can tell by the way they wrote the steps, as we understood them. The God I understood then is not the God I understand today. For those of you of the Christian faith, because I've received the mind of Christ. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintance for a closed-mouth understanding friend. So those of you who are getting ready to take people through their steps, that's what you're hoping to grow into, is a closed-mouth understanding friend. Yep. How many of you would have to admit that when we first get here, we're neither closed-mouth nor understanding? Which is why it's just as important. You're never doing a 12-step on someone else. When you're doing your 12-step, you're trying to benefit, you're trying to awaken yourself. The other one's healing is above your pay grade. You're just an instrument. Okay? Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. It may be one of our own family, but we cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand, yet be unaffected. So understand what? Unaffected by what? Yeah, exactly, Lance. It nails it. Understand that they are in their search for the truth. Does that make sense? Not your truth, not my truth, the truth. Different standard. And I'm unaffected by whatever revelations that comes through. How many of you have started working with someone and they told you something about themselves that disturbed you? Then you should recuse yourself, because you can't help someone you're judging. Does that make sense? So they're starting to talk to us about this. How many of you have disclosed something to somebody and you knew you were being judged the minute you laid it out there? So don't be afraid to get up and say, peace out. Your life's on the line. So's theirs, quite frankly. Okay, so the rule is we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be that one is so situated that there is no suitable person available. You think that's true in Phoenix, Arizona today? Yeah, Sean's talking about people that don't want to put anything in writing because they're not in a place where they can store it safely. But how many of you had never been in a jail or a prison cell and still didn't want to put it in writing because of whatever your living situation was? So it's really, any reason you're too afraid to do it is a good enough reason. We're going to tell you all the reasons why we did it. I once thought and felt as you do, I doubt I'd have made much progress had I not taken action. Here's the action I took. This is what I experienced as a result. If you'd like to go through the process with me, you let me know, contemplate it, and we'll go when you're ready. Because if we drag them through the steps, guys, we cheat them out of their spiritual experience. The condition is honestly want to and willing to make the effort. Those of you more biblically inclined, we must worship in spirit and in truth. Can't do that based on a lie. Okay. If that is so, this step may be postponed, only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through it at the first opportunity. We say this because we're very anxious that we talk to the right person. So how many of you discovered that when you really were ready to get clean and come clean, you found somebody and you started talking? That's how we know they're very anxious that they're talking to the right person, aren't they? How many of you have the same experience? It's important that he be able to keep a confidence. More requirements for those of you taking people through their steps. You need to be able to keep a confidence, that he fully understand and approve what we're driving at. What is he driving at? His or her search for the truth. So I fully understand you're in the search for the truth, and I approve of your search for the truth. Does it make sense? Provided we're following this process, we're not looking out in the world for the truth, because the great reality is within. Make sense? And that he will not try and change our plan. How many of you have heard somebody that you're working with a rather convoluted plan? Come on. There's got to be someone in this crowd needed to sell the last bit of stash just to get set up for sobriety. Dude, I've heard that 1,000,000 times. I don't believe it. There's not anyone in here hasn't heard that. Look, I just got one more 8-ball I got to sell. I'm going to go to the casino. What could go wrong? But we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. So once again, they're going to tell us what that looks like. Remember in your own experience, when you were ready to be unburdened, how much time did you waste? When you were ready to get high, how much time did you waste? We're not trying to get abstinent here. We're trying to get spiritually inebriated. Get it straight. I'm dependent. They didn't change my dependency. They changed what I was dependent on. We explain to our partner what we're about to do and why we have to do it. How many of you, when you went through this the very first time, could have explained to your partner what you were about to do and why you had to do it? None of us, probably, right? There was a little thing they learned along the way. They thought they could send this book out in the country. People would just read it and recover on their own. They even found a gentleman who claimed to have done so. So they sent him a bus ticket. Come to New York, tell your story, we'll put you in the book. Dude was too drunk to get off the bus. So his little story didn't appear in the book. So what we've learned along the way is there is a human impartation to the healing that we need. No one can read this book, folks, till someone shows them how. To show others precisely how we've recovered is the main purpose of the book. It doesn't say to tell others. Most people write books to tell. They wrote a book to show, and it intends that I will sit down and show you just as some other man sat down and showed me. And not only in the book, but in his walk. Okay? Okay, so he should realize that we're engaged upon a life and death errand. So how many of you realize that you're engaged in a life and death errand? Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. They'll be honored by our confidence. Those of you afraid to ask, I wasn't speaking out of school. The authors told us the same thing. if when you tell somebody you desperately want the help and the Spirit has sent you to them, we are obligated, if we're in the Spirit, to honor your request. And if they tell you they're too busy, then they're probably not the right one. That's all. No judgment. All right, so here's some more instruction. We pocket our pride and go to it. They do a lot with metaphor. What do they mean, pocket our pride? Where's my people that got to a fourth step and a fifth step? Was there a bunch of stuff in there you really didn't want to have to tell? So they're drawing the picture of, I got to get it out. There are no secrets in the realm of the Spirit. The only way I'm ever going to get over this is that this healer is going to come into me and allow me to use this for higher purpose. Yeah? Okay. So we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. So did you catch the promise and the condition? So how many of you went through a fifth step with somebody and they asked you immediately, how do you feel? You're numb? How many of you have taken someone through a fifth step and you knew how they felt? Yes. How many of you tried to hold something back in a fifth step and wondered how the fuck they knew? I'm going to tell you some tricks of the trade here. When you're in the Spirit and you're taking somebody through that, when they let go of that thing that's blocking them, there will be a sensory, tangible flow of the Spirit. And even if they are so dead in spirit that they can't feel it, I'll feel it. And it's my obligation to call it to their attention. Because they will, if you awaken them to it, feel it. And then we can speak into that spirit. And the other thing is, if you're trying to hold it back, we know you're holding it back. I have always known when you held my hit. And I'm doing this fifth step to get my hit. Am I lying? Where's my people that hear a bunch of... Not lying, am I? So then it tells you some more conditions of awakening in the Spirit. We can look the world in the eye. Come on, where's my people that experience not only incarceration, but homelessness and all kinds of degradation, maybe at our own hands? To be able to look the world in the eye is quite a promise, isn't it? Because we averted gazes for a long time, some of us. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. How many of you didn't know that was what was happening, but all of a sudden you started waking up in a world that was strangely more colorful than the one you had been living in? How many of you found out birds sing in the daytime? I'm talking about things that happen to us as we awaken. And how many of you know that you can see the moon during the day? Still amazes me to this time. I was so dead I didn't know that was happening. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Our fears fall from us. Given that my selfishness was driven by 100 forms of fear, and now as I've encountered non-judgment, both from a sponsor and from the Spirit within me, I'm starting to lose my fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. Make sense? We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. See how they're talking about the tangible sensory nature of the experience of building relationship with Creator? We don't build relationship with concepts and theologies. We build relationship with experiences. God, the subject of my experience, not the object of my belief. Does that make sense? So at this point, we're feeling the nearness of Creator because I wasn't holding him up, so I couldn't let him down, as the song goes. And that's quite a relief for many of us, isn't it? All right, so we may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. That's why half atheists and agnostics tell you you need not be disconcerted, because our experience changed our mind. And they're starting to talk about what it is to awaken in the Spirit. The goal of 12-step recovery is what? To awaken in the Spirit. We get the impression it's about abstinence, but it's not. That's a goal in the fellowship. But in the manner of living, your goal in 12-step recovery is to wake up. And then stay awake more than not. We're all subject to nodding, Carrie Ann. Some more than others. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. How many of you did a 5th step? Having survived the 4th step, did a 5th step and thought, I feel so much better, and then did nothing else. Prosecuted maybe an amend or two and let her go. How many of you returned to active addiction? How many of you suffered? Yeah, because it's a manner of living. And 5 is only getting me organized so I can keep hopping. Okay, so we feel we're on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. So another metaphor. So what's it like to feel like you're on a broad highway walking hand in hand with the Spirit? They start to talk about what it really feels like in the 9th step promises, but you're not there right now. But how many of you felt like you lived your whole life on a tightrope? How many of you found out when it was okay to be perfectly imperfect and just walk into your new identity, the world got bigger? They're just painting a picture for us. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. Precise instructions. So I've told the story. I've probably sweat and got uncomfortable and had to share something that was really distasteful to me, and I was not judged, but I realized I still judged me. And so now I need to go reflect on the experience of non-judgment, disclosure of secrets, how I'm feeling. Our model here for therapy is breathe, heal, fly. Our model is kind of mapped after this. I've got a 3rd step decision, an encounter with power in 2. I've told the story. I haven't been struck dead. I've got another human that's still willing to talk to me. Breathe. And then the next several steps are going to be about healing, and then by 12 I'm flying. Make sense? Now I'm serving. Okay? All right, so carefully reviewing what we've done. So what have we done? I've taken a look at the calamities, pomps, and worships. I've taken a look at the resentments and the fears and the relationship misconduct. Yes? We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. That's often the first honest prayer that any of us ever say, because we've encountered tangible power, so I'm now not talking to something someone told me about. I'm talking to a power animating in and through me. And I know this, not think this, know this. Right? Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. So in a minute, we're going to go to 58, 59, somewhere around there. I know, I knew I did it wrong. I think I do it just to see if Sean's awake. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we've omitted anything, for we're building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Then they ask themselves a series of questions, and in AA's book, when they ask a question, that's your time to go inward. Eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness. Don't walk around blind in the world. We walk by faith, not by sight. Okay? Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? So let's go back to page 59, and let's look at the first 5 proposals. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Powerless when?
Before, after, and during.
Anyone conclude the same thing? Over the years, I've heard people pontificating, if you used again, you just chose to use, which would indicate that I had power somehow, strangely, when I wasn't drinking. But the insanity is acted out, noticeable by the first drink. They always call our attention to the insanity of the first drink. So you cannot make a choice with an unsound mind. So my problem is not choices I make. My problem is I'm insane and I don't think so. Any of you ever been insane and you don't think so? If you made it to these rooms, I got to break it to you. It'll come on you in time. How many of you got here and you didn't want to be like these people? Yeah. That our lives had become unmanageable. There was a dash. They separated the two ideas. I'm powerless over alcohol. Then they separated the idea that my life had become unmanageable. How many of you assume, yeah, no shit, the way I use, life got tricky? But they separated those two. They didn't even talk to me about the unmanageability of my life until after I'd copped to this and moved on to my encounter in 2. You want to go back to that? So let's go back to page 52, maybe? It's the first time I've ever done this. Page 52, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. So I have an alcoholic problem that is defined by an abnormal reaction, maybe the manifestation of an allergy. When I take a drink of alcohol, it energizes me. And that is an abnormal reaction to a sedative. So that puts me in a distinct class. So that's my alcoholic condition. Now I've got this human condition they're going to introduce me to. And it says we were having trouble with personal relationships. How many of you discovered that? How many of you sobered up and still had trouble with personal relationships? How many of you decided people were the problem and isolated yourself away? How many of you still had trouble with personal relationships? Because the main problem centers in the mind. And although we claim to know we're human, we don't think ourselves human. I hear people say that all the time. I can't change people, places, or things. The only thing I can change is me. Great plan, but you're a people. You can't change you. But he can change you. Come to believe. All right. So we couldn't control our emotional natures. Have you had that discovery? How many of you are all chill? And then somebody came by that reminded you of something, and all of a sudden you weren't so chill. We were prey to misery and depression. How many of you discovered that after you sobered up? How many of you went back to those same doctors and found a synthetic solution to your spiritual problem? I'm not picking on, some people are on meds they should be on. But a lot of us, we get on meds because why not? We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. That's the unmanageability of my life. Anyone relate to that? Okay, so that's where we are with those items. That moves us on to step 2, which suggests that they came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Who's we? First 100. They came to believe based on an experience. Notice how they said power, not God in step 2, because of the prejudice of some. Half were atheists or agnostics, so we come to believe in power, and then we walk out in servitude of that power, and the power will let you know who he is. Okay? So where do we find this power? And how do we find it? Sometimes we have to search fearlessly, so it would make sense I would encounter power, then I would make a decision to enjoin that power on a search within to examine the calamities, pomps, and worships that have obscured from me the power and purpose within me. Does it make sense? Okay? So then it says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Now they're unashamed because they've told us that power is God, right? None of us can fully comprehend or define that power which is God, but we can experience it and we can grow in the experience. They said, God as we understood Him, that is not the same as a God of your understanding. People have taught that for years. It's a lie. That's not what they said. God as we understood Him. Those who have thoroughly followed our path. They've told you over and over again, one path. Does that make sense? So if you don't get the outcome they got, it's probably because you listened to Harvey over there in the back row with, and my sponsor said just do this here. Get you a light bulb. Bill understood God to be a power within him, even though he was a declared atheist. He said a cool wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. That's what he said. He said he had revelations of his time in the graveyard, the real significance of my time in the graveyard. I saw a headstone of a soldier who had survived war, and I was scared, and that power came on me and calmed me down. And I went to war, and now I'm in New York all these years later, and I'm dying of alcoholism, and the power's with me again. The real significance, that power never left me. That's the power of my work, right? Better than a doorknob or a light bulb or Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We've done a 4. Admitted to God, and we know God to be this experience within. To ourselves, I'm owning my part, and to another human being. Yeah? All right, so we good? Then it says if we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. What happens if I can't answer to my satisfaction? Call the response back. Explain it to me again. Walk me through it. Remember, you've got to share your honest doubt and prejudice, and if you will, we will, because we're required to, the Spirit in us will inform you. And I say, have you ever got the idea, people talk about I chose not to use. I chose not to use for years. Didn't stop me from using. You know why? Because I had lost the power of choice. But when I decided to come to believe, because this power snatched me up and carried me back to the flock and put me on my feet, then I decided to serve because I was dead and now I'm alive. Does that make sense? And I want to tell you another little secret. The chosen don't choose. So if you're here and you're working for this power, you were chosen. Okay, so we've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? So they're getting me ready for my 6th step, which is a preparation in prayer and meditation. You may write something down if you need to get priorities. But they gave me the entirety instruction in there. What was the instruction? Let God. Let power remove from me all the things that are objectionable. How many of you have heard people or maybe said, I'm working on my defects of character? What are you doing? Polishing them up? As you grow in the Spirit, you'll realize things that you think are assets are not, and things that you think are defects are not. And it's situational, and it's not always all about you. Does that make sense? Can he now take them all, every one? Notice how they're asking me the question again. You know how the defects go away, don't you? Has anyone explained it to you? The defects go away because as we go out to serve, we get a heart more and more to be effective in who we're serving. And we find out the stuff that screws up our servitude. Let me give you an example so you get what I'm saying. I worked in a behavioral health center for seriously mentally ill people, a day center, and I find myself quite witty at times. So I'm in there being me, being witty, and they didn't have the intellectual capacity to process me being witty, and so one of them came up to me afterwards and said, "Joe, why are you making fun of us?" It crushed me. So why would you think that? Well, you're making jokes at our expense. So I learned that my wit and sarcasm were inappropriately deployed, and they were to people that could not comprehend it. You know where else we do it? When the new guy walks in the room, we're all cutting up like ha, 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 and we get here tore up from the floor up, and they ain't nothing funny. And we're supposed to discern in the spirit that they just need compassion. And an ear, not a mouth. Does it make sense? Is that a good enough example for those who? Okay. All right. So are we now ready are we now ready to let God remove all the things which we've admitted objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? How many of you have to admit you weren't ready to let go of all of it right away? And how many of you have learned since you didn't even know all of it right away? The more you work with people, the more you're going to learn about your old ideas. And so you're not even going to know what your old ideas are until someone sparks them in you, right? So if we cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. We ask power to help us be willing. The point we want to emphasize here is, guys, if willingness was of me, I would have demonstrated willingness before I destroyed my life. Willingness is divine power. And nobody grows into willingness through condemnation and judgment. So when you're working with somebody and you can see they're not willing, it's because we're not sufficient to give them the non-judgment they need to grow, perhaps. There are those too. There are such unfortunates. I mean, the reality is we got to put in our part because it's my 12th step I'm doing. But the reality is, of course, they don't have willingness as all they feel is condemnation. I have no righteousness of me, but it flows through me. Does it make sense? Okay. So when ready, we say something like this: My Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. I point out to you the amen because some time ago in the fellowships, people wrote out the 3rd step prayer and the 7th step prayer, and they put an amen at the 3rd step prayer, and that's not really what's up. There is no amen at the 3rd step prayer because it's half the prayer. See, I wasn't expecting, God didn't make too hard terms on those who earnestly seek. I've agreed to go out and make amends for harms done, spend the rest of my life witnessing to the power of God, and I don't even know what that looks like until I've gone through 3, 4, 5. Share, does it make sense? So now when I'm asking for agreement, now I need power because this is about subordinating the ego, taking captive the thoughts, and walking out in the Spirit. Does it make sense now? Okay. So that's it. We've then completed step 7. Thanks.